Rolling.
There it is. Well, welcome everybody. This is Two Beards and a Bible. My name's John Swaino, and this good-looking fella over here is
Dave Tenney.
And we are about to look into the book of Luke. And Dave's going to read with his smooth, dulcet tones.
I told John I was going to read first because I had to do a little introduction to the reading, because last week we talked about Jesus before Pilate, but I believe we were reading out of Matthew. And as I was going over the material, I looked at the Luke account, and there was a thing in here I thought was interesting.
Yeah, as I was looking at it and remembering what we had talked about before, it's striking the differences between the accounts.
Yes.
And there are some very interesting things there. So
this Luke account has less detail about Jesus and Pilate, and that's why I didn't pick it to read for the other one. But this is the thing. I'm going to read through the first 5 verses because I just want to, this will be a kind of review what we talked about last week. It says, then the whole multitude of them arose and led him to Pilate, and they began to accuse him, saying, we found this fellow perverting the nation and forbidding to pay taxes to Caesar, saying that he himself is Christ the King. And then Pilate asked him, saying, are you the king of the Jews? And he answered and said, it is as you say. So Pilate said to the chief priests and the crowd, I find no fault in this man. And here's the thing I thought was interesting. It says, but they were the more fierce, saying, he stirs up the people, teaching throughout Judea, beginning from Galilee to this place. And when Pilate heard of Galilee, he asked if the man were Galilean. And as soon as he knew that he belonged to Herod's jurisdiction, he sent him to Herod, who was in Jerusalem at that time. And that's the thing that I thought was interesting, that Jesus is, as soon as he heard that Jesus was from this region, that's the reason he sent him to Herod.
Yeah.
Which the other account didn't make that clear.
Hoping to wash his hands of it.
Yeah.
And, okay, let's get this guy out of here. There's my way out.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's what he did.
And looking at these people, methinks they doth protesteth too much. Yeah. And this is the case with human beings.
Yeah.
And when we look at the way people act even today, oftentimes it's the people that are the guiltiest that yell and scream the loudest.
Oh, no doubt.
And point fingers and so on. And this is just interesting. People, we've said this before, people often will say, and I'm sure you've all heard, that people say that, well, the Bible is just so out of date and it's so dry to read. Well, this stuff reads just like the most interesting of headlines from today.
I think people only say that because they've never read it.
Right.
They've never considered it.
Right.
Now, there are some things in the Old Testament that are harder to read.
Genealogies get a little dry, but there's a purpose for them.
Yeah. But the New Testament's pretty exciting the whole way through.
Yeah.
And basically, I think like in the Old Testament, the narrative, which is about half the Old Testament, that's exciting all the way through.
Yeah.
As you read the narrative of what happened. So.
Absolutely.
So I stopped there at verse 8. It says, so now we're going to go to Herod. We're going to go forward, and the next scene is going to involve Herod, if we were making a play out of this.
You want me to read?
Yeah, go ahead.
Where do you want me to read to? Where do you think we should?
From 8 till, oh my word, how about 8 to 12?
Okay. All right, so starting at verse 8, Luke chapter 23. Now when Herod saw Jesus, he was exceedingly glad, for he had desired for a long time to see him, because he had heard many things about him, and he hoped to see some miracle done by him. Then he questioned him with many words, but he answered him nothing. And the chief priests and scribes stood and vehemently accused him. Then Herod with his men of war treated him with contempt and mocked him, arrayed him in gorgeous robe, and sent him back to Pilate.
And read 12.
That very day, Pilate and Herod became friends with each other, for previously they had been at enmity with each other.
What's that word mean?
They were enemies. They were
opposed to each other. Yeah. So Herod is excited to see Jesus. Mm-hmm. This is the same Herod that chopped off John the Baptist's head.
Yeah.
not so long before this.
Yeah. It speaks to how popular, the word was traveling like wildfire that, this man is going around and doing these wonderful things. And he'd heard of him. Now, I wonder if he, was seeking to find out if he was the Christ. I kind of think not, and what had happened. I think he was more looking for a good show.
Yeah, absolutely.
Come entertain me. I'd like to see this that I hear about.
If you ever read anything about the Herods, that was boy, what a messed up family that was. And one of the ancient writers, I think he was talking about Herod the Great, his father, said that he would rather be Herod's enemy than one of his sons.
Oh, wow.
So pretty, I think he killed several of his own kids.
It unfortunately becomes that way sometimes.
Yeah. But Herod's, he wanted to see, I don't think he wanted to see a miracle because it was proving who Jesus was. He wanted to see one because it was a magic trick.
Right. And just in that short little bit, the fact that, just after he was asking him to perform something for him, then he was treating him with contempt, and he was going along with the crowd, which is what I kind of get out of this. And I don't know, Herod's supposed to be a leader.
Yeah.
But it kind of seems like he was kind of following the crowd at that point in time, at least in that regard. Of course, he still had his phony man-made power.
Yeah.
But yeah, it seemed for a little instant there, he's flipped the script and was showing his willingness to be a follower.
Why do you think Jesus kept silent?
Well, just as we were saying, that we don't think that Herod came to learn anything from him or to be wowed in any good way by his power. He just better not. He knew that he should not throw his pearls of wisdom to the swine.
Yeah, and I was thinking about this. Jesus' mission was done. Mm-hmm. All he had to do was give up his life on the cross at this point. Not that was some flippant thing, but I mean, he had already said all he could say.
Right.
There's not, and of course Jesus knows Herod's heart. Right. He knows Pilate's heart, so he knows exactly what to say and what not to say.
Yeah, and at this point, it obviously wouldn't have done anything to try to convince him or say anything. You think of a bully on the playground.
Yeah.
And what are you supposed to do with a bully on the playground? Sometimes we want to knock them upside the head and retaliate for what they're doing to us. But the smart thing to do, and even take it up to the grown-up world, or someone who's mad at you on the road rage, you don't engage them.
Right.
You just let it go. And that there's wisdom in that. Yeah. We see that wisdom here, I think.
It's, here's the Son of God, the creator of the earth, and they're mocking him.
Yeah.
That's just a ridiculous thing to think about.
What a look of terror and horror is going to be on their faces.
Yes, at the judgment. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, if not already realizing what they had done.
Right. And this whole thing made Pilate and Herod good buddies.
Yeah. That's interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, they found something to bond over.
Yeah.
And you see that, again, it makes me think of this playground bully. The two opposing playground bullies, they might be fighting with each other, and then along comes someone else that they can both pick on, and then they team up.
Yeah.
It's just the same thing as we see in
nothing's changed.
Elementary school.
All right, I'm going to start at verse 13. It says, Then Pilate, when he had called together the chief priests, the rulers, and the people, said to them, You have brought this man to me as the one who misleads the people, and indeed, having examined him in your presence, I have found no fault in this man concerning those things which you accuse him. No, neither did Herod, for I sent you back to him. And indeed, nothing deserving of death has been done by him. I will therefore chastise him and release him. For it was necessary for him to release one to them at the feast. So at this point, it seems like, Jesus is going to get off without really a whole lot of damage done to him.
Right. And this in verse 17 where it says it was necessary for him to release one to them at the feast. Do you have any more knowledge than I do about that?
I do. I've read about that now. This was a week ago when I read about this. Apparently, at some point, there was some sort of uprising over a prisoner. And I should have wrote this down, but it became a tradition in order to keep the peace of the people that the Romans were to release a prisoner to the Jews of their choosing.
Okay.
At this feast time every year, and it was just like one of those ways to keep the peace.
I knew that it was a custom, but I wasn't sure the background of that. And
yeah, I mean, it had started over. There was some uprising over some prisoner.
Yeah.
And then they ended up releasing him, and then that became like a custom they did every year.
Yeah. And it's. Again, it seems as though, the leaders are a little bit afraid of the crowds.
Oh,
the
yeah.
people, because maybe a lot afraid.
Yeah.
And, so they're being swayed by those people, even though they can't find anything wrong. And that's, further proof, that this is Christ, and an honest heart would see that for what it is.
Yeah. I think this is another example, too, of why the Jews annoyed the Romans to no end and why eventually Rome had enough of this kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. But they had a long history of this kind of bickering and kind of being ungrateful and whatever. Just lots of problems with the Romans and, about 20, 30 years from now, Rome just says, okay, we had enough of this.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, it's interesting, and they, having dressed him up and kind of poked fun at him, and
yep.
and then they're going to send him back. I mean that's really, doesn't that just hit you?
Yeah.
It's so.
And there was nothing Jesus did. Even according to the old law, there was no thing that he did that they could have found any fault with.
Yeah.
Not one thing. He broke no law. Not of the old law, not of Roman law.
Right. Yeah, that's
the Jews couldn't point to there wasn't some law, even these things they're accusing, he misleads the people. Well, there was no law about that.
And there was no misleading.
Right.
Yeah. He
even if it was true, there was no law about that.
Right. Yeah.
You want to pick up at 18 and read till 24:5?
Sure. Verse 18 there it says, "And they all cried out at once, saying, 'Away with this man, and release to us Barabbas, who had been thrown into prison for a certain rebellion made in the city, and for murder.' Pilate, therefore, wishing to release Jesus, again called out to them, but they shouted, saying, 'Crucify him, crucify him.' And then he said to them the third time, 'Why? What evil has he done? I have found no reason for death in him. I will therefore chastise him and let him go.' But they were insistent, demanding with loud voices that he be crucified, and the voices of these men and of the chief priests prevailed. So Pilate gave sentence that it should be as they requested, and he released to them the one they requested, who for rebellion and murder had been thrown into prison. But he delivered Jesus to their will."
So they're going to release a guy that they know who rebelled and who murdered people.
Yeah.
Right? A thing deserving of death.
Right. Yeah, and that's, that would be, that would be something that today would be headline news. And,
Oh.
This has happened over and over throughout history, and it just makes you scratch your head. And
Yeah.
you'd like to think that if you were in that position and you were there at that time, that you would be among the ones, fighting for Christ. But
Yes.
the crowd is very persuasive. And when you get into a group of people, we see it, we've all experienced it as children. Hopefully we've gotten over it a bit as adults. But that idea of fitting in with the group of people that you're with, I mean, it really is, has a tight hold
it does.
on everybody.
Yeah, people really get worked up about that sort of stuff, and they don't want to be seen as an outcast.
Right. Even in the face of an obvious truth,
Yeah.
to the contrary of what they're being asked to do.
Absolutely. And it seems, so Pilate, the way I count it, he tried to change their mind 3 different times, it seems. 3 different times he goes out and says, whoa, there's nothing, he's done nothing.
Right.
And they were just insistent.
Yeah.
And of course, to crucify somebody is it's not the worst way you could die.
Absolutely.
Just about.
If you just kind of wonder what would have happened if he would have just refused and let him go, they probably would have killed him.
Yeah.
It doesn't sound like they were going to give up.
Yeah.
And, of course we know that, that was prophesied and it had to be done.
Yeah.
So, but it is something that makes you really, really wonder.
Does that excuse Pilate's actions?
Yeah, boy, from your human reasoning and your emotion in the thing, you kind of feel bad for Pilate a little bit as you read through that. But in reality, he's like all other men, and he was faced with he had an understanding of the truth. He said it.
Yep.
And yet he still followed through and went against it. It even says there, where were we at so in verse 25, and it says, and he released to them the one they requested, for who rebellion and murder had been thrown into prison, but he delivered Jesus to their will.
Yes.
So he's got Christ in front of him, realizing that he's innocent, and yet he yields to their will instead of
the truth.
So I have to think that from what we understand of the scriptures and understanding that the Lord desires that all men are obedient to the truth, nothing was different then
than it is now.
And so unless something changed that we don't know of, that's something that would have to be answered for.
Yeah. I mean, Pilate seems like a typical politician.
Yeah.
Although it seems like he did try to do the right thing, but in the end, he just, he knew where his bread was buttered, so that's what he went with.
Yeah. And that's I was talking earlier today with someone about a person that I know that I know for a fact knows the truth, and yet stays in the situation that they're in because of exactly that reason. They know where their bread is buttered. This is a person who works in with a religious group. And I've heard out of his own mouth, that he understands that he's doing things that are not in accordance with the
will of God,
and the will of God. But it doesn't. I'm not going to say it doesn't matter, but to him, but he realizes that he realizes the truth, and yet he refuses to do it because of the pull of the physical things of this life, and perhaps the happiness of his family and children. In the immediate future. I said it's a sad thing.
Where are we at here, Johnny?
Oh boy.
19 minutes. Okay, so let's go ahead. I'll read the hard part here. I'll read 26 for all. I'm going to start there and I might stop. I will stop for sure, but I'm not sure where. It says, now as they led him away, they laid hold of a certain man, Simon a Cyrenian, who was coming from the country, and on him they laid the cross that he might bear it after Jesus. Why do you think he did that?
That they pulled a man out of the crowd to.
Yeah, to carry his cross.
I think Jesus was physically stumbling and
Yeah.
and not able to continue. Just
It doesn't in this part we read here. It doesn't really talk about. Let me see. Let's see what Matthew 27 says.
well, you're turning there. I was just asked the question. I believe it was on Sunday. Someone asked me, do you think that Jesus really sweated blood? And in the garden as he was praying, and that is a real. And maybe we talked about this.
You and I talked about that.
It's a real condition, but it's extremely rare.
Yeah.
And it comes from a highly stressful situation.
Yeah, he could have. I mean, it doesn't. The scripture doesn't say he sweated blood, but it said his
Like
sweat
blood.
was like blood. So,
Yeah.
I mean, either way,
Yeah.
you could tell it was an extremely difficult situation.
Right.
I don't know where it's at because I didn't write this down, but it also talks about, it talks about Jesus being scourged.
Right.
And that's the one part here that Luke is not talking about. But, before Jesus was taken to the cross, they basically just beat the snot out of him.
Right. And the scourging, that's all kinds of shards of glass and stone and things that, like knives digging into your flesh. And you can imagine once you get through your skin and you get through the fatty tissue and so on, you get down to the muscle. It probably had severed muscles and tendons.
Oh, yeah.
And so even if he had the will to keep moving, your body would just eventually stop.
Yeah. And they said a lot of people never made it through the scourging.
Yeah.
They would never get to be hung on the cross because they would die before that time.
I mean, I'd imagine you'd bleed out.
Yeah.
In many cases before you got there.
So I think that all plays into why Simon was bearing the cross for Jesus.
Yeah.
Was carrying it for him. Verse 27, and a great multitude of the people followed him, and the women also mourned and lamented him. But Jesus turned to them and said, Daughters of Jerusalem, do not weep for me, but weep for yourselves and for your children. For indeed the days are coming in which they will say, Blessed are the barren wombs that never bore, and breasts which never nursed. Then they will begin to say to the mountains, Fall on us, and to the hills, cover us. For if they do these things in the greenwood, what will be done in the dry? Oh, that's an interesting thing to think about. Okay, so he's talking about, so all these ladies are wailing and mourning. Hey, they got a lot more guts than the men do, right? Mm-hmm. They're wailing and mourning, and Jesus makes this prophecy. And he talks about that those that would be barren would be blessed. What do you think he's prophesizing?
Basically, it brings to mind of you wishing they had never been born. Kind of idea from.
I think he's talking about the fall of Jerusalem, is what I think he's talking.
Yeah, and that obvious. Yeah, because when the day of Pentecost comes and the Lord's church is established, there's no more room for that old law that they followed, and so absolutely.
He says here, for if they do these things in the greenwood, what will be done in the dry? What do you make of that?
I'm going to let you speak there. I have some thoughts that right now it kind of still goes along with that barren
Yeah.
The dry being the barren and the green wood being, life, right now when they still have their opportunity. But
Here,
I'll stop and I'll let you give me the...
This is what I think he's saying. I could be 100% wrong about this. So you've got two things, the green wood and the dry wood he's talking about. So I think he's talking about when he says, or they do these things in the green wood, I think what he's talking about is at this point, the Jewish nation is still alive.
Yeah.
Right? It's still a thing. But after he's goes to the cross, it's going to be dead. It's going to be dead wood.
Yeah.
So he's saying if they do these things, while the nation's here, wait till it's gone.
Yeah.
And then see what happens.
Yeah. I agree. I think you got it right.
That's what I think it means.
I think that makes some good sense.
You have Zur there.
I do.
The Zur commentary. It's verse 33. Verse 31, I'm sorry. What does he write on that?
Green and dry are used figuratively, meaning trees that are alive or dead. In the application, they represent a righteous and unrighteous person. If such distress will be imposed upon a righteous person, Christ, what may be expected to be done to a wicked nation? And its helpless citizens were destined to share in the general calamity brought about by the wicked leaders.
Yeah, I could go with that too.
Okay. I think your thought sounds better.
Yeah.
I think it makes some sense.
Yeah. So it's there are some things, and I think that's a good example. There are some things in the New Testament where, it's like, okay, we have to chew on that a little bit. Maybe I don't totally understand that.
And that's par for the course for Christ when he's speaking.
Yeah.
So many times he said things that made the people that were with him, even the apostles, scratch their head and not understand exactly. But in time, and as we look back, I think we can have with the context of everything that we have in the scriptures at our disposal here today, we can have a better idea than them that were standing right there.
Yeah. It says, we're at 27 minutes, John.
All right.
I think we probably better wrap it up here because we're not going to get through this next section.
Sounds great.
So next week we'll talk about the thieves that were on the cross, and we'll talk about some of the different things that surround that, and I'm sure we'll have a good sparring.
The thief on the cross. That's a
good subject,
one.
Right? Good subject to talk about. So.
All right. Well, Lord willing, we'll be back next time, and hopefully you can join in with us. Thanks for listening in.